Imagine sitting down to a dinner party in ancient Rome. The year is 100 AD. The wine is watered down. A slave is quietly refilling your cup. And the food placed in front of you is aggressively flavored, sharp, pungent, and undeniably hot. But here's the thing. There is not a single chili pepper in sight, not one, because chili peppers simply do not exist yet in this part of the world. They are sitting undiscovered in the Americas, roughly 1,400 years away from Columbus ever setting foot on that continent. So how did the Romans do it? How did they build a cuisine that was complex, mouth-warming, and deeply satisfying without the one ingredient we now associate most strongly with spice? That's exactly what we're going to find out today. And the answer is going to make you rethink everything you assume about the food of the ancient world. First, we need to completely reset the mental model most people carry about ancient Roman food, because a lot of people assume it was either lavishly bizarre. Think of that famous story about dormice stuffed with pork and rolled in honey, or that it was basic peasant fare, just bread, porridge, and boiled vegetables. And the truth is far more interesting than either of those extremes. Romans were genuinely obsessed with flavor layering. They wanted a dish to hit you in waves. Something sour, then something sweet, then something deeply savory, and then something that made your mouth feel electric and alive. And that last quality, that warmth and tingling bite, is exactly what we'd call spiciness today. But Romans got there through an entirely different pantry, one that was shaped by trade routes, stretching from the British Isles all the way to India. The Roman cookbook that actually survives to this day, a collection known as the Apicius, is packed with recipes calling for spices we rarely use now, combined in combinations that would feel completely alien to a modern home cook. But if you read between the lines, you can see precisely what they were going for: heat, depth, and that quality that makes you want to take one more bite. If there was a single ingredient that defined Roman cooking above all others, it was black pepper, and not in a casual, sprinkle a little on your eggs kind of way. Romans used pepper the way some cultures use chili today, liberally, boldly, and on almost everything that appeared on the table. Black pepper came from India, which made it extraordinarily expensive by the time it reached European markets, because it traveled by ship through the Red Sea, across Egypt, or overland through Persia, along what we now call the Silk Road, passing through dozens of hands along the way, with each merchant taking their cut. And yet Romans used it constantly and in staggering quantities. When the Visigoth king Alaric sacked Rome in 410 AD, among his ransom demands was 3,000 pounds of pepper. 3,000 pounds. And that single fact tells you everything you need to know about how culturally essential this spice had become. In the Apicius, pepper appears in nearly every single recipe. Meat dishes, fish dishes, sauces, vinaigrettes, and even some preparations that are closer to dessert. Because it was the default source of heat, the background warmth that underpinned Roman cuisine, the way dried chili underpins Thai or Mexican cooking today. And they were not using pre-ground powder either. They used whole peppercorns, freshly cracked at the table, which gives a far more volatile, fragrant, and piercing heat than what most of us get out of a plastic grinder, meaning that Romans would have experienced black pepper as genuinely, properly fiery. Black pepper was not working alone. because Romans had an entire arsenal of sharp, biting, heat-producing ingredients, and some of them are more surprising than you might expect. Take mustard, for example. Romans called it sinapis, and they used it extensively as whole seeds pressed into sauces, as a coarse paste spread directly onto roasted meat, and as an ingredient in sharp vinaigrettes. And what makes mustard interesting is that its heat is categorically different from chili heat. It's that sinus-clearing, nasal, almost eye-watering sting rather than a burn on the lips or tongue. And Romans knew this and deployed it strategically for exactly that effect. Then there's long pepper, piper longum, which actually predates black pepper in European cooking and was considered by wealthy Romans to be the more prestigious of the two. It comes from the same plant family as black pepper, but delivers a more complex heat with a floral quality and a slow build that lingers, and Roman writers describe it in terms that suggest real connoisseurship, the way a wine lover might distinguish between two different vintages. Ginger appears in Roman texts under the name zingiber and shows up in spiced wines, in certain medicinal preparations, and in some meat dishes, providing that familiar spreading warmth in the chest and throat that we still associate with ginger today. And then there's the ingredient that often gets overlooked entirely, rocket, which we call arugula, a leafy green that Romans ate raw in salads and prized specifically for its peppery, almost radish-like bite. It was accessible to everyone regardless of class, cheap enough that even the urban poor could have it, and it delivered a genuine and immediate heat that required no trade route whatsoever. Now let's talk about something that doesn't provide heat in the traditional sense, but is so deeply woven into the fabric of Roman flavor that you genuinely can't understand their food without it. And that ingredient is garum, a fermented fish sauce that was to ancient Rome what salt is to a modern kitchen. Garum was produced by packing small whole fish, often mackerel, anchovies, or whatever was plentiful, with large amounts of salt into clay pots, and then leaving them exposed to the hot Mediterranean sun for weeks or even months, during which time the fish broke down entirely into a dark, intensely savory liquid. And the smell during this process was reportedly so overwhelming that Roman law actually prohibited garum factories from operating inside city limits. But the finished product was something Romans treated as indispensable. It was drizzled over vegetables, stirred into sauces used to baste roasting meat, and blended into marinades, providing a depth of savory, umami-rich intensity that amplified every other flavor in the dish, including the spices. Think of it this way. Garum didn't provide heat on its own, but it made the heat hit harder and spread further. And when you layer the sharp, piercing bite of freshly cracked pepper over the deep, savory backbone of garum, the result is exactly that. Keep eating, can't stop, full-mouth intensity that modern cooks chase with chili. The closest living equivalent is Southeast Asian fish sauce, Vietnamese nuoc cham, or Thai nam pla. And if you genuinely want to understand what Roman food tasted like, using fish sauce in your cooking is probably the single biggest step you can take toward experiencing it. Here is where the story gets genuinely tragic, because among all the spices that Romans prized, there is one we will never taste. A plant so important to ancient commerce that it was engraved on coins and described by Roman writers as irreplaceable, worth more than silver by weight. and central to the identity of an entire city-state. That plant was silphium, native to the North African city of Cyrene in what is now Libya, and it was harvested so aggressively to meet Roman demand that it went extinct sometime in the 1st century AD, making it one of the earliest documented cases of a species being consumed entirely out of existence by human appetite. Roman writers describe its flavor as intensely pungent, somewhere between garlic, asafoetida, which is its closest surviving botanical relative, and something entirely its own that has no modern equivalent. And it was used as a seasoning, as a medicine, and as a status symbol that announced its owner's wealth and connections. Pliny the Elder wrote about its disappearance with what reads almost like mourning, noting that the last known stalk was sent to Emperor Nero as a curiosity, and that was apparently that. Today, food historians use asafoetida as the closest approximation in reconstructed Roman recipes, a resin that is aggressively pungent raw, but mellows when cooked into something deep and savory, almost like onion and garlic combined. And it gives you a hint of what silphium might have been, just a hint. Something important that often gets lost when we talk about Roman food is that not everyone was eating the same thing, because Roman society was sharply stratified, and that stratification showed up directly on the dinner table in ways that were impossible to miss. Wealthy Romans, the senators, the successful merchants, the elite military class, had access to long pepper, exotic eastern spices, the finest grades of garum produced in specialist factories, and silphium before it ran out. And their food was aggressively and demonstratively flavored with imported ingredients that served as a daily advertisement of their access to the empire's trade networks. For everyone else, the urban poor who lived in cramped apartment buildings, the legionary soldiers on campaign, the farmers working land they didn't own, the spice palette was simpler, but still flavorful, and by no means bland. Salt, vinegar, mustard, wild herbs, cheaper grades of local garum, garlic and leeks and onions for sharpness, and vinegar for acid and bite. Roman soldiers, interestingly, were among the best-fed people in the ancient world by caloric standards, their rations carefully standardized and supplied by a formidable military logistics system. But their food was plain by elite standards, and they seasoned it primarily with pasca, a mixture of water and sour wine vinegar, and whatever grew wild along the campaign route. So when we talk about Roman food, we are always really talking about a spectrum. The apicius represents the dinner party for senators end of that spectrum, while the thermopolium, on a busy street corner in Pompeii, was serving something else entirely. So let's zoom all the way out, because what this entire story really tells us is something that goes far beyond ancient Rome. Romans didn't need chili peppers because they never knew they were missing anything. They built centuries of culinary tradition around the ingredients they had access to, and that tradition was rich, sophisticated, and deeply satisfying entirely on its own terms. The idea that spicy food inherently means chili food is genuinely modern and genuinely parochial, because for most of human history and across most of the world, the heat in food came from pepper, from mustard, from ginger, from horseradish, from garlic, from fermented and pickled things, and chili peppers are, in fact, the late arrivals. They've only been part of European and Asian cooking for about 500 years, while Roman pepper-based cooking is 2,000 years old. There's also something poignant sitting at the center of this story, because we've lost so much of it. Silphium is gone permanently. The specific varieties of pepper that Romans used may be subtly different from what fills our spice jars today. And the exact flavor profile of premium aged Roman garum is something no living person has ever tasted. We can reconstruct it, approximate it, make educated guesses based on what we know, but we cannot truly know it. And yet, every time someone reaches for fish sauce to deepen a pasta sauce, or cracks whole peppercorns into a braise, or makes a sharp mustard vinaigrette, they are reaching back, knowingly or not, towards something ancient, because the desire to make food bite, to make it warm from the inside, to make it linger, that has not changed in 2,000 years, and it never will. If you enjoyed this video, I'm working on a companion piece about Roman drinking culture, because the wine situation is equally strange and equally fascinating, so hit subscribe so you don't miss it, and drop in the comments. Which Roman ingredient would you most want to try for yourself? I'll see you in the next one.